Okay, this is an afternoon 131 studio. We're just looking at how to use the layouts in Rhino, and also how to play with line type manipulation in terms of line type and dash lines, thicknesses, and so on individually. So I'm just going to zoom in here. This is something we were playing around with in the morning, but let's just call this, for lack of a term, this is like a geometry study I did in Rhino of my artifact in a certain elevation, okay? I ended up subdividing things in halves. I found the thirds point. I found this circle, located the center of this circle, these things, and I have this geometry. As I moved across, I actually copied all of this line work over and then started manipulating what I wanted out of this drawing. So I deleted certain pieces. I made these on the darkest layer because I wanted to focus on these two circles, one being on center, the one being on the thirds in the vertical. I wanted to keep some of the sort of vectors that allowed me to find those intersections. And then I also, as you'll see here, I have this darkest, right? I'm on the darkest layer, but it's dashed. So just to show folks how this works, I'm going to go back here and show you in the properties menu. You can see that you have properties, and this is for the PC or the Mac. Properties. Layer is specific. Display color says by layer. So in other words, it's purple because it's on darkest. You could change that, but I know that purple is darkest is the view I have. Display mode is by view. Okay. Line type. If I go back to by layer, you'll notice this line got solid. So I'm going to do the same for these, because by default, our layers are all made up of solid lines. So I'm going to go back to this line again, look at it. Line type scale, it's by default 1. Print color by layer, I'm going to keep that on right now. Print width by layer, that's interesting, right? The actual width of the pieces, which we have in my studio, we have printouts of the different line thicknesses that come out of vector printing. And so that by layer we can manipulate. And so as I look to these, one of the first things I want to do is, let's just say we decided that in this diagram, this, and this were all the most important aspects of this drawing. Okay, I want to really reinforce this grid. Okay, but I also want to show that they were finding center points, these two circles, but they were less important. So to me, I'm going to play with dashed as less important. Okay, so dashed, I have options here. I have continuous, which is what our layer is set up to be. Center, which is a center line, which we'll take a look at in a second. Dash dot, kind of sounds like what it means, a dash and then a dot, dash and dot. Dashed, dots, and hidden. So I'm going to turn on dashed here. As you can see, it's not a lot of dashes to how dashed works in terms of the size of this thing, right? I'm not saying that's too little, but I just want to make it a little bit more. So I could choose other lines. So I could try hidden, which makes it a little bit tighter. But I also could go back to dashed here and manipulate the scale. The smaller the scale, the more dashes. 0.5, 0.25. The larger the scale, the less dashes. So let's just say for now I'm going to put this at 0.25, but it's going to be our thicker line. But I'm also concerned that I don't want these lines to not seem like big, fat, Sharpie lines from my trace paper. So my print width, I can go down here. Instead of by layer, I can choose by the properties, which we'll look at in a second. The layer thicknesses are set up to go as high with darkest as 0.5. So why don't I bump this guy up to 1? This is going to be double the thickness of what it was, but just for those lines that I chose. I've overridden those properties. And by those properties, I mean, here's the layers tab. And you can see it's right here. My print width, darkest is 0.5, then 0.35, then 0.25, then 0.13, and then finally hairline. And so with those lines, I can now play with things like in-between thicknesses, one larger thickness, and so on. I can also change, this is the print color, and you'll see these are all black, right? I think it's nice that we have grayscale. Grayscale is very affordable printing, really interesting because it's analogous to your pencil line weights and your marker line weights. But what if instead I wanted to make sure to show that these two circles, although dashed, are different? I can come here, instead of manipulating these print colors, I can come here and say print color and I can say custom, and now I can pick red. And so again, even though those are purple showing, they're going to show up as red when I print them. Everything else will obey those layers. So as you look at this, right, I've got these kind of translations, and this would be, in my opinion, a nice use of like example of serial diagrams. This initial web of 4H lines, some finding of some hierarchy, maybe an in-between, and then finally these two circles that sort of play with the trimming of things to kind of play with. I was talking earlier with a couple folks about gestalt, so the idea of defined by that edge, right? Defined by that. So maybe if I wanted to play with these more, I could actually add a hatch in here and play with things, right? So I can actually go to hatch, and I can pick these curves, and I could say, okay, hatch, apply, and I could do that, right? I could also use the hatch command, selecting these curves, and I can go in and play with different verticals, maybe hatch dash, and so on, right? And I can start to create different experiences that happen, right? So that's the nice thing about the way that we can use digital manipulation. What I did later on is I just copied everything down again, right? So I'm going to copy this all down, and I'm going to do this one all over again, right? So in this scenario, I copied everything down, but this time I inverted, and I really wanted to focus on the two X's that are made by these geometries, right? So I got rid of the bounding boxes you saw of my artifact. I now have this X that finds the top third, and I've got rid of the upper half and really focused on the bottom X. And so with the copy command, I actually moved these over. I knew that these were moved over 4.5 inches because it's my drawing. I can move this over, right? So I'm going to take this over and go, okay, copy, 4.5. And now I have this, and I can go back now and play with things like trim. And so what if I took the same diagram and I wanted to reinforce that the circle's the winner? And as you see, I now have a completely different read on this drawing, especially if I come back here, and we said earlier, I think we said that this is going to be red, right? These pieces. I can use a thing called match properties. So I want to select the objects to modify with match properties. I would like these two objects to be modified. Enter. Select the source objects. And I want to match, for this scenario, I can match all this stuff. That's fine. And I now know that I have two dashed red lines that are here. So I've manipulated this by code, and I now have a thicker red line. These lines here going through. I still have my dominant X's, and as you'll see, you could argue that this X isn't really as necessary, but I like the intersection, but I missed it, right? I actually missed it here and here. So I can go back and say, here and here. And I can change object layer, and now I've moved them on, right? So you can also, in the digital world, go through, and you can just keep copying these. Notice how I'm in the top view, not the layout view. This means that I can have an infinite amount of pieces of paper in a model space, in this one-to-one space forever. As I go into layouts, I'm actually drawing on a piece of 11 by 17 paper. So this is actually a window, and I'll go to 11 by 17, 1. This is a window that's looking into here, okay? And so if I go to this viewport, that's what it's looking at. Notice how it says locked. You guys probably noticed this on your template. It's by default locked. And that's so that you don't end up zooming in and out. I'll show you what that means. If I'm unlocked and I go in, now I'm active in the viewport, oops, I've zoomed in. Well, that's okay because I know what I want to do. Of course, I could come over and undo things, but I can go here and say 1 inch in layout is 1 inch because I'm one-to-one. And you notice I'm a little bit off. That's okay. I can use my right-hand mouse button and pan. And click out, and I'm back. The other nice thing about that, though, is I can do a duplicate. So in this scenario, I'm going to duplicate this. I'll delete this old L2 from an earlier example. So I can duplicate this thing, rename it, and it's going to call it L, instead of L for landscape, L2. So landscape 2. But you'll notice they're duplicates. So now if I check that I'm unlocked, I can come back here and I can pan and bring my new window up. And as I do this, I come in, I can double check, I'm at 1:1, and that's all I care about, the scale value of the page, because I'm at 1:1. I haven't filled out my name and instructor yet, right? But I'm saying, but once I have this title block the way I like it, I can copy these things and go on. And this is now a diagram set. The thing I want to play with now is I want to be able to print, right? Well, we've already looked at in our studio printing from a window. Now I can print from layouts. And layouts are really nice and tidy because they're 11 by 17s. So these things are already set up as individual 11 by 17s. Go through. So my layout size, tabloid 11 by 17. Orientation, I'm working in landscape. Some of you may choose to work in portrait. That's why we have the two layout types. You can do a mix and match. My output type is vector because I'm still only dealing with lines. Print color is what I want. I want the color to come out the way it's supposed to be printed, not my display color, nor just straight black and white because we did manipulate some red. And then my default view or view and output scale, I could choose layouts, top, I could choose top and window. Instead, I'm going to choose print multiple layouts, and I'm going to choose L1 and L2. And now I'm going to get a multi-page PDF. I can also choose to save as a separate file, but for our purposes, I'm just going to hit print. And as I come over here, I'll call this test 3, just so I can find it. I've now printed two 11 by 17s, except now I have these drawing types, right? And I would say that, like, at the very least, right, even though we don't know this object, as I've diagrammed across the page from like proportional line work, geometry, moving across left to right, you kind of understand the relationship because you can see almost the implied guidelines. I could have drawn guidelines, but those three artifacts together make a diagram, in my opinion, right? Those are three individual diagrams, but they are themselves like needing each other. And then this other one was just a different way to play with hierarchy of just really focusing on different aspects of like what might be more important in the diagram, what's happening, and so on. Okay? And you can see I missed one here that I didn't match the properties. That's okay. Unlike hand drafting, or if I had to physically print this right away, this is a check print. I know I can go back and say, all right, I'd like this to be solid, and I'd like this to match that, right? So I can go back into Rhino, top view, and I can take this, I can change object layer, and I can take these two and change them to by layer, which will bring them back. And then again, because I had a split line, I have that, okay? So this is hopefully a way to sort of think through how you can use copy, trim, thickness, doing the same diagram 3 different ways because you're looking for different hierarchies. And also that idea of a distillation. Is this the same drawing as this? I hope we are all comfortable saying no, but does this drawing need, or diagram need the orthographic drawings to go with it? Well, we don't have to make that argument. We have them on the wall. They'll be with these pieces. So that's the nice thing about the sort of geometry laid out. Okay? So rest assured, you could always come back and idiosyncratically play with one line. But the big takeaway, right, is if I liked this to be red and I wanted to code it for myself, which I did not do, right? I just said, okay, this is the sequence. I can come back here and say display color, custom, and I can actually make this jump out as red. And now I can see that these are red, right? That's neither here nor there because the rest of them are coming out black and white. And so that will hopefully sort of cover a decent amount of like in-between stuff with like some changing of one thing thick or thin and so on. But also the purpose of this next few days especially is to just mess around in Rhino and see what kind of guidelines, curvature, geometry you can take forward. Okay?